Ramallah, with special guests from Tel Aviv, Meretz City Council member Mickey Gitson and the mayor's senior political advisor, Eitan Schwartz. And this evening, we have another very special guest from Israel, Barry Shaw, the author of the best-selling Hasbara book, Israel Reclaiming the Narrative, an indispensable guide to why Israel is under attack by those promoting a false narrative and a dangerous agenda against the Jewish state. He is here tonight to present his latest book, Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism. His writing for the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, and elsewhere is only a small part of his advocacy work. Barry Shaw is an advocacy expert on countering the assaults on Israel's legitimacy. He was the founder of the Netanya Terror Victims Organization when a wave of Palestinian terror attacks hit his hometown of Netanya. You may recall the Passover massacre at the Park Hotel in 2002. That was only one of numerous suicide bombings in Netanya. There were shootings and car bombs. More than 50 people were killed and many hundreds were injured. Barry Shaw became the special consultant on delegitimization issues to the Strategic Dialogue Center at Netanya Academic College. The center defines, identifies, and confronts the plague of delegitimization campaigns against Israel. Barry Shaw is also a member of the Knesset Forum on Israel Legitimacy. In the new Knesset, the forum will be confronting issues of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and the re-emergence of anti-Semitism that takes the form of anti-Zionism. His main passion has been the development of a global network of pro-Israel support groups. In the past year, it has been the local grassroots groups who have been proactive and successful in recruiting new supporters for Israel and in confronting anti-Israel activists. He writes and speaks on how to rephrase the narrative by speaking truth and justice for Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, Barry Shaw and his wife, Carol, have decided to come spend their 50th wedding anniversary with us. So let's give him a round of applause.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Good. First of all, who loves Israel? I can't hear you. Who loves Israel? One of the things I was quite moved for when I came here was just outside here, there's something called the Anne Frank Hall. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl killed by a radical ideology driven by Jew hatred. The Middle East has been full of Anne Franks, killed by radical ideologies driven by Jew hatred. Israel, over the last several decades, in fact, for almost 100 years, have had enough of Anne Franks killed by radical ideology linked to Jew hatred, be they Arab or be they Palestinian. As I was researching the book, I was struck by the similarities with what is happening to Israel and the Jews today to what they suffered in the days of Anne Frank in the early 30s. We thought that anti-Semitism had died in Auschwitz, along with Anne and the death of Europe's Jews, but it didn't. It simply lay dormant waiting for the horrors of its purpose to recede with time and take away the guilt and shame, waiting to morph into another form so that it could re-emerge and carry the masses with it as it did in the 30s. And it found that purpose in Israel. It found it in an alliance of the radical left and the hateful Arabs. The Holocaust didn't start with Auschwitz. It began with words, hateful words, words that demonize, words that delegitimize. This time, not the individual Jew, but the collective Jew, Israel. But for the European Zionist haters, it also makes victims of the local Jew. It starts with words and it never ends with words. Once you've demonized the Jew, actions come next. And they are justified because the Jew is portrayed as evil. In the 30s, language was perverted to demonize the Jew. Today, it's perverted to demonize the Jewish state. In the 30s, brown shirts boycotted Jewish businesses. Today, we have BDS doing the same thing. In the 30s, we had Nazi supporters banning Jewish academics and intimidating Jewish students. Today we have Palestine supporters doing the same thing. In the 30s, Nuremberg laws outlawed Jews from society. Today we have United Nations resolution outlawing the Jewish state, turning it into the pariah of the international community. We are the unique victim of a historic hatred. In the biblical past, they hated our nationhood based on Mosaic laws and values. In medieval times, they hated us for our religion. The Nazis hated us for our DNA. It was enough to be a Jew, no further questions required. And still, it didn't help deny your Jewishness. They still demonized you, delegitimized you, and took away your life. Today, the world is fixated on Israel. We're never off the front page or the political agenda. Now, people have fixations for one of two reasons. It's either love or it's hate. And surveys have found that 70% of the world are fixated on Israel out of hate. The world has come full circle. Today they hate us for our unique and successful Jewish state. They deny our Jewish heritage, our Zionism, and they hate our DNA. Jewish self-determination is questioned, libeled, called racist and apartheid. They demonize us, they delegitimize us, and they take away our lives. Look carefully, and you will see the new anti-Semitism dressed up in the Palestinian cause, the topic of my book. I want to read you here. The book starts off with, for instance, I take the three central pillars of the Palestinian political movement, the Hamas Charter. Now, I want to make this point. We see today the wholesale massacre of Christians and Yazidis through Iraq and Syria by Islamic State. And the reason the Islamic states are not getting their hands on the Jews over there was because the Jews in Iraq were already persecuted in the 20s and in the 40s, and the ones who managed to escape to Israel that gave them shelter. But however, when we read the Hamas Charter, I find echoes of Islamic State. Article 1, the Islamic resistance movement draws its guideline from Islam. Article 3, the basic structure of the Islamic resistance movement consists of Muslims who are devoted to Allah. This is not me being Islamophobic. This is Hamas in their own words. The Islamic resistance movement is a distinct Palestinian movement who owns its loyalty to Allah, and listen to this, strives to raise the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine. Jihad is its path, and death for the cause of Allah. Now, if the Hamas Charter was a founding document of a national cause of Palestinian self-determination, fine. But you tell me which national movement has this as Article 7 as Hamas. The time will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees who will cry out, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come out and kill him." Now you tell me that is not anti-Semitic. I could go on. There are reams of this in the Hamas Charter. And if it was the Hamas Charter, you can say, well, it's an extreme terrorist group. By the way, the European Council of Justice earlier this year decided that Hamas is not a terrorist organisation, despite what they did last summer to Israel. But let's go to the Palestinian National Charter, which has not been received. Palestine, with boundaries under the British mandate, is the homeland of Palestinian Arabs as indivisible. So they're not talking about two-state solution, they're talking about a one-state solution where Israel doesn't exist. The Jews who lived in Palestine before the Zionist immigration are considered Palestinian. Very kind of them. There wasn't a Palestine there before, there wasn't a state. And if you think that the Palestinian National Charter, the Palestinian Authority, is a peaceful, liberating, loving people, armed struggle is the only way to liberate Palestine. This is the overall strategy, not merely a tactical phrase. And it goes on, talking about the Zionism is racism, and the Balfour Declaration, the British mandate for Palestine, are null and void, and any contracts that will be signed will be also become null and void, etc., etc. So then we come to the third leg, which is the Fatah Charter. Fatah is the party of Mahmoud Abbas. And again, this speaks about denying Balfour Declaration, denying the League of Nations, denying Zionism. All of Palestine is Palestine. May I remind you that Mahmoud Abbas, our so-called peace partner, earned his doctorate at the Moscow University on Holocaust denial. Mahmoud Abbas has declared that any Palestinian state will be free of Jews. Judenrein. Doesn't that sound a little bit like ethnic cleansing, genocide, Nazi propaganda to you? Today, the Israeli-hating Palestinian supporters have adopted a new secular god of human rights, and they apply this newfound replacement theology against Israel in its name. They accuse us of the 6 cardinal sins of human rights, and they are racism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide, lawlessness, oppression. All of these you can apply to the Palestinians, not only against us, but the Palestinians against their own people. Now, all these human rights are not shared by the Palestinians themselves, but they are exploited by the Palestinians to win points in the secular West for their political benefit, and it's working well for them. This political campaign began in Durban, South Africa in 2001 with the adoption of that ridiculous phrase, Zionism is racism, which was adopted by the United Nations and took several years for it to be dismissed. Then we have on campuses in several countries that pantomime called Israel Apartheid Week. Again, there is no other political activity on campus anywhere in the world, with all the world's crises that are going on, that deserves not a day, not 2 days, but a week of political charades and pantomime. Israel Apartheid Week. Israel Apartheid State, give me a break. And then we come to the United Nations Human Rights Council. What a farce of a name that is, that has a permanent Israel-bashing Article 7. Now, just before I came out, I received this. If you want to know the number of total United Nations human rights condemnations between the years 2006 and 2015, let me read this. Remember, we're talking about human rights, nations with human rights crimes. Venezuela, Vietnam, Yemen, Zimbabwe, China, Cuba, Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Russia, Pakistan, Somalia, not condemned once. Eritrea, Sri Lanka, Sudan and Libya, twice. Wow. Iran, 5 times. North Korea, 8 times. Syria, 15 times. Top of the list, Israel, 61 times. Human rights, United Nations Human Rights Council, give me a break. Palestine is abused, language is abused in the cause of Palestine. I'll give you 3 words in 3 lines in 4 words. 3 lines in 4 words. Illegally occupied Palestinian land. It's not illegal, it's not occupied, and it's not Palestinian land. International law is quoted against Israel where no international law exists. The result of this is a 50-year history of the Geneva Convention where only one country has been accused not once but 3 times for violations of international humanitarian law. Guess which country that is? Israel. And the accusers of the worst human rights violators on this planet. And you know the worst crime? European nations never voted once in defense of Israel. Shame on them. Shame on your government if they believe that this is true. They tried to imply that we Jews, Israelis, have abandoned human rights and deserve to be expelled and killed, just as they did to the Jews of old for abandoning their God. It's replacement theology in secular garb. And then it's not true today. No matter, the Jews must still be punished and banished because they are evil. The hounding of Israel goes on and on. There is no truth and no justice for Israel, just as there was no truth and no justice for European Jews in the 30s. There are 2 ways to be fooled and to be fools. One is to believe what isn't true, and the other is to refuse to believe what is true. I'm sorry to say, that is Europe today. You can continue to blame Israel. We've become an easy target, but look deeper and question. We are seeing in the territories today something that your media is not telling you. European governments, your government, fund organisations whose real goal is to create friction, confrontation, report lies, and point the finger at guilt at Israel. These NGOs come to implant hatred in the heart of the Arabs against the Jews, which basically is an easy thing to do because they're there anyway. But they finance and help organise the provocations to report the Jew doing something wrong, to declare the Jew evil, and end the story of the Jew being there. And they do so in the guise of civil rights. So I'm asking you, what do you get for the billions of euros pumped into the Palestinian cause? You get a more rejectionist, more emboldened, more intolerant Palestinian leadership and society. You get more conflict, you're not getting peace, you're not getting negotiations, you're not getting talks. Why should Mahmoud Abbas talk? He gets what he wants by stoking up the Europeans to dump down on Israel, just like some people tried to do in your municipality over here, rather than do something that would be positive for people. And the Europeans are dancing to this drum. The more he gets, the stronger his demands. No recognition of Israel's rights, no recognition of Israel, a dead end. NGOs document every lane, uncorroborated, completely confined, and relay it to the relevant governments who publish them in official reports as evidence of Israeli crimes. This is happening over and over and over again. Israel does not have a peace partner. We have a threatening enemy being funded and held by the European Union, European governments, including your own, and their NGOs, who do more to stir up trouble than to bring the Palestinians to peace and reconciliation. Europe is fanning the flames of an Israeli-Palestinian conflict by outsourcing to well-funded NGOs who are heating up an existing anti-Semitism against the Jewish state. And you're paying for it out of your tax dollars. This has to end. Peace will not come with the unilateral establishment of a state of Palestine with an agenda to annihilate the Jewish state and incorporate Israel's corpse into a greater Palestine from the river to the sea. Division of land to satisfy the international community will not bring peace. Your government is focusing on a fiction. It is not Israel's attitude to Palestinians that is fault here. It is the Palestinians' attitude against Israel that has always been the obstacle. Israel's Prime Minister said recently that the Palestinians demand that we recognize the Palestinian state while they refuse to recognize a Jewish state. That is correct. The concept of a two-state solution seems to be one state that is not recognized as a Jewish state and a second state in which Jews are forbidden to live. And the Europeans don't understand why Israelis reject that solution. I've heard it said that if Israel signs a deal, the Palestinians will change. These people have got it the wrong way around. First, the Palestinians have to change, only then can we have a deal. People demand an Israeli initiative. How about a Palestinian initiative? After all, they're the ones who are demanding a state. Let them make the necessary concessions and reform for peace. As Major General Nimrod Sheffer said recently, he's the head of IDF Planning Directorate, Israel cannot afford to gamble with our security. We saw that last year with yet another assault by the Palestinian Hamas and Islamic Jihad against our country, and this happens every 2 years after we withdraw every soldier, every citizen out of the Gaza Strip. Thank God we didn't listen to Ed Barak and withdraw from the Golan Heights. We would have had Islamic states in Tiberias today. In Israel, security trumps everything. BDS gains attention and recruits way out of proportion to their financial clout against Israel, which is minimal. BDS can't punish Israel economically, and they know it. Their financial damage isn't even a pinprick. Its aim is to demoralize the Jewish people and the pro-Israel community, beat them into silence and submission by intimidation if it works. Jews and the Jewish state are its exclusive target. BDS is a propaganda tool, a tool of delegitimization. Jewish leaders, Christian leaders ought to understand that BDS should be countered with initiatives that take away their oxygen and their lies and allow the pro-Israel community to overwhelm the BDS bullshit with truth and facts. BDS are people who are emotionally eloquent but intellectually dumb. You don't surrender to BDS, you fight them. BDS is not a West Bank issue, it's an Israeli survival issue. Whoever labels products labeled people. We remember that from the 30s. Labeling products from Judea and Samaria puts a yellow star on the Jewish produce, and that is anti-Semitism. BDS is nothing but a smokescreen for anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism. They are Israel deniers. Hamas looks on BDS as an important ally. Both Hamas and BDS want to end Israel's existence. BDS and Hamas drive Palestinian workers out of Jewish companies even though they can't offer them any alternative work. Now, the award-winning Arab journalist Khaled Abu Tuami wrote, "If BDS supporters really care for Palestinians, why don't they go to the Gaza Strip and try to promote the rights of women living under Hamas rule? Why don't they try to promote reforms, democracy, freedom of speech under the Palestinian Authority and Hamas? I add, why no BDS pressure on Egypt and Jordan?" I want to tell you some facts here. Israel have sent into Gaza Strip 1.1 million tons of construction material at no small risk to ourselves. The last time we did that, we had Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, terrorist attack tunnels killing our people in Israel, and we know they're reconstructing those tunnels today. 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2012, at the time of the last Hamas-Palestinian conflict against us, we were sending in 250, 260 trucks a day while the conflict was going on and afterwards. Today, do you know how many trucks are going into Gaza from Israel? 800 a day. 800 trucks of material, humanitarian aid, etc. Now, why don't the BDS protest against the Egyptian embassies? Because while this is going on, Egypt has destroyed 1,700 Hamas smuggling tunnels. The border from Egypt into the Gaza Strip remains closed. Nothing goes in there. Nothing. If BDS really cared for the Palestinians, they should be protesting outside the Jordanian embassy. Do you know that this 60 years, something like that, there are over 1 million so-called Palestinian refugees in refugee camps in Jordan? Isn't that a human rights crime? Isn't that apartheid? And yet they have nothing to say about that. Why? Is it because there are no Jews in Jordan? Isn't that a crime? Isn't it the BDS movement didn't protest against outside the Syrian embassy when the Syrians were slaughtering the Palestinians in camps in Syria a few months ago? They are totally silent on that. The only time you see BDS acting if there's a Jewish target somewhere. Here, in your country, in Britain, in America, and certainly in Israel. They are anti-Semites. At the end of the day, BDS is more about hating Israel than helping Palestinians. And BDS is more about spreading the Hamas message than it is about spreading the message of peace and coexistence. Natan Sharansky defined anti-Semitism as the 3 Ds. You know what that is? Demonization, delegitimization, double standards. I add a 4th, denial. Denial of Jewish history and heritage. Denial of the rights of the Jewish people to self-determination. Denial of Zionism. This also is anti-Semitism. Israel will not be intimidated by BDS threats, just as we are not intimidated by Hamas threats. We have faced far more serious life-threatening dangers than BDS and came out stronger. So from